All right. And you are recording. Here they come. Welcome, everybody. We have a little bit of time while participants enter the room. And so while we're waiting for everybody to show up for this webinar tonight, we'll just chat with Ann. I see the sun is in your face. Is it warm there?
You know what? It was absolutely a spectacular day. We've had 90-degree weather, and then a couple days ago the weather broke, and today was just beautiful, high of 73, and just the perfect summer day, the reason people live in Michigan, really. So very nice. Hopefully we'll have a nice sunset. We have
maybe we'll get to watch it behind you.
Yes, I live right near Lake Michigan, so it sets at 9:20, so
there you go.
Yeah.
Deb Freely is waving and saying hi, Ann.
Hi, Deb. Miss you.
All right. So for those of you that are entering, we have participants. Looks like it's slowed down a little. And so this is a webinar. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Zoom webinar, we cannot see you or hear you. And so it will be myself, and if you see on your screen, Corey Berrigan, I'll be introducing her. I'm Sandy Carpenter. I'm Vice Chair of Fly Fishers International Women Connect. And thank you, FFI, for sponsoring these webinars. So we can't see you, we can't hear you. And so Corey will be helping me monitor. If you have any questions, you can chat or do a Q&A, and Ann will be giving a presentation. So if it has to do with the slide, if you want to go back and see another slide, we'll interrupt Ann. Otherwise, if you have a general question about her book, about how we can get a hold of her if we want to ask her more questions, future discussions, we'll hold those to the end. If you are having trouble seeing the screen, if we're flipping in and out, we'll spotlight Ann's talk, and so as soon as her talk begins, everybody will be able to see her slides and the bugs, and you are in for a fabulous night, folks. This is, I just saw the Cliff Notes version, and it's pretty amazing. Oh, thank you. Somebody, I am not Patrick Barry. I'm using his webinar account. Oh, yeah. I will change my name. He should be so lucky to have this color lipstick, I must say. I would like to introduce Corey. She is the social chair of FFI Women Connect, and she's heard this talk before. I heard nothing but good things. So Corey, would you do the pleasure of introducing Ann, please?
I would be honored to do so. So I'm going to introduce Ann Miller. She is the author of the Hatch Guide for Upper Midwest Streams. Tonight's presentation is fittingly called Virtually Buggy. Ann will discuss some of the hows and whys of writing her book, as well as an overview of trout stream entomology. Her book is a popular fly and hatch reference for many women in my club, Fly Fishing Women of Minnesota. Ann presented to my club a little over a month ago, and it was amazing. Ann's knowledge of entomology will impress you, guaranteed. Ann is also the founder of Fly Girls of Michigan, is an FFI charter club. And here is the woman of the hour. Uh-oh, where'd she go? Ann. She did.
We had this totally planned.
I know, sorry.
Okay.
I just realized in moving out of the sun, I need to get my computer charger. So just keep chatting.
Yeah, Lib.
Yes. Okay. So this is live, this is relaxed, this is why you can chat and ask Q&As, because, you know, you got to plug in your computer every once in a while.
Yeah, so hopefully I won't need it, but if I do, it's right behind me. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and...
looks good.
Okay, good.
There we go.
There we go. And I will take myself out of the picture here.
Well, all right. So thank you all for being here this evening. And I'm excited to share some of my knowledge and fun that I've had with studying insects and applications to trout fishing. And tonight's program is called Virtually Buggy, because we are virtual, as you know. So back in the early to mid 90s, I was raising kids, and so had a little time on my hands also, or was looking for a way out of the house from time to time. And I became very involved with our local council of what was then the Federation of Fly Fishers. And the Great Lakes Council was very large, very many states. And we were very active in teaching women how to fly fish. And so because I had my degrees in aquatic biology, I always taught the entomology section of all the classes, which of course I was super excited about, and enjoyed sharing this knowledge and helping people to kind of have the, wow connect when they figured out why they were using a particular fly at a certain time of the year and what they were actually imitating. And at one point, during this time, I would have to say there wasn't really a single good reference to have people go and say, go get this book and then you'll know more. There were actually, lots and lots of books, and I think I have all of them. And I would cut and paste and then share that with people. And at some point, a publisher came to me and said, hey, I heard that you might be interested in actually writing a hatch guide for the Midwest. What do you think? And so I thought about it for a little while, and I really had a pretty good idea of how much work it would be. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And it'll take me about 3 years. And so I got started on it. And collecting the immature stage of the insect was relatively easy. They're not too difficult to photograph. There are ways to slow them down, make them behave under the spotlight, so as it were. But as it turned out, the adult stages were a different story. And as I collected insects and brought them back from the river to shoot in my photo studio, AKA the basement, I would often, somehow damage them along the way, whether I broke their wing, killed them. That one I really killed. I tried to put it in the freezer a little too long to slow it down, and it never recovered. And a dead insect or an insect with a broken tail or a broken wing really isn't suitable for printable material. And so I just was kind of at a, real crossroad on how a real panic moment, because I was under the gun on a timeline, I had 3 years to do this. And 6 months into the project, I really didn't have a good adult insect. And so no amount of Photoshop can really put that tail back together. I could tuck it and hide it away, but I didn't want to do that. So I kind of racked my brain and remembered a colleague from the biology station in University of Michigan's biology station in Pellston, and he had come up with some artificial streams, and I called and talked to him and got some ideas on how I could maybe recreate something like that, and then try to hatch insects right in my home. Isn't what we all want, right? To hatch insects in the comfort of our home. So what you're looking at here is a great big fish tank, and I have river water in the base of it, and I have all kinds of oxygen bubbling into there. I had it temperature controlled, and then at the top there's a recirculating pump and with flexible tubing there, and then the white is what you think it is. It's an eaves trough, and it cascades down to a couple levels. And so I brought materials from the river, rock and wood and so forth, and built a little stream bed, and then kept a steady flow going in this. And then I inoculated it with various aquatic larvae and nymphs. So in this picture, I was actually raising, I do believe, Hendrickson nymphs, and you can see some Hendricksons that have hatched out and then were captured in the netting. And then I could just reach in there and gently extract those and get a number of them, and then take them down and get some great photos. Here's a sulfur mayfly, and you can see it looks pretty darn good. The nice thing also, by putting 25 to 40 of those in, I was really assured of getting at least 1 or 2 insects that had all their body parts. And I could also get male and female, which sometimes look very different. So there's a Hendrickson peeking there through the web net on top. And you can't tell what that is. But anyway, you get the idea. I also had a number of tanks. These are all full of insects. Not every insect has to have that flowing water. Some can hatch out of more still water and actually crawl out to emerge. So in this particular tank, I had all of these different nymphs in there from the Manistee River here in Michigan. And these particular ones do indeed crawl out, and you can see on the far left an adult that has just emerged, and that middle insect is just about ready to pop right there. Kind of looks like a little alien there at the top with its little eyes peeking out and everything. And there you have an adult ready to go right downstairs to the photo studio. So this made it so much easier, and I made really great strides in being able to then get all the insects that I had planned on getting. They were now right there at my doorstep, so to speak. So the result is my hatch guide for Upper Midwest streams. And it right now, unfortunately, has gone out of print, but I am working to get this republished, and I'm hoping to have it happen by the end of this year. Of course, the pandemic hit in the midst of this, and I started working with another publisher, and then their whole publishing operation kind of shut down. So I have the wheels in motion now, and in the event, I know some of you are interested in getting this. So if you let Sandy, she's going to have a little post survey, and if you are interested, you can provide your name and email, and I will contact you when I'm ready, when I have the book in hand. The second, I'm going to actually have a true second edition, and I will have some of the insects that I ran out of time and couldn't finish life cycles with, or flies, get flies tied for. So it'll have some additional information in it. So let's now kind of talk about some of the nitty-gritty of what's in the book. And what I love to share with people is, understanding the life cycles of many of these big orders of mayflies that are important on a river. The first one we'll talk about right now is the mayfly life cycle, ephemerata, as they're called in Latin terms. The mayflies have what's called an incomplete metamorphosis, and you know the word metamorphosis from 3rd grade when you studied the monarch butterfly. And we know in that metamorphosis we have a complete change where we go from an egg to a caterpillar, which is a larva, and then to a cocoon or a pupa stage, and then to adult, where you have a very radical change. That's called a complete metamorphosis, or a complete change. With the mayflies, they don't really have a cocoon stage, so we call the immature stage a nymph. And when the female lays her eggs, the nymphs will grow, and they will grow and develop. And as they get bigger, we call that molting. And they have to shed their skin that you know, at each time. And they, you know, depending on the species, that might happen, you know, 25 to 30 times or even more. And it takes typically a year for that to happen. And tonight when I'm talking about all of this, know that there's going to be exceptions to everything. Yes, there are mayflies that take less than a year and some that take more than a year. But by and large, this is a 1-year life cycle. And it's a very synchronous cycle too. So when all of the nymphs are ready to hatch pretty much at the same time, and so you have thousands of them emerging all at once, and that's pretty exciting. It of course gets the fish excited, which that's really the whole point of it, right? So that nymph will swim, or in some cases crawl out, maybe on surrounding vegetation. But let's say for now we have nymphs swimming, and they'll swim to the surface, and then right along the back, right on their thorax region, the subadult, the winged adult, I should say, will extract itself and then float for a little bit of time on the water. And we call that stage, if you're an entomologist, you call it a subimago, but that's too hard to remember. So anglers just call it a dun. And then that dun stage will fly away and kind of rest in the surrounding vegetation for a day, sometimes 2 days, and then it will molt again. So mayflies are kind of a very primitive insect. They're the only insect that actually molts as an adult. So after that second molt, then we call it a spinner stage, and that stage is the actual reproductive stage. A couple things about mayfly adults: they don't have any mouth parts, so they don't feed at all, and they really are only alive for a few days. And the adults, after they, you know, the spinner stage, they have some interesting behavior. So the males will come back into kind of a mating cloud. We call that, well, the males come back and they do a little dance, and they emit some pheromones and hope to get the females interested and actually attracted to the cloud. Then they will use their big long legs and grab them from underneath, and, you know, put their end of their parts into their parts, into the female parts. And then, you know, they will have mated. Sometimes this will happen more than once. And once the females then typically will rest for a little bit and then come back and lay their eggs. So what's neat about this, and then both male and female will eventually die. Most of them will fall in the water, and we call that then a spent spinner. But as anglers, the neat thing is we can imitate each one of these different stages of the life cycle with different patterns. Sometimes a pattern is more important in a particular species than another. Sometimes you'll have very massive spinner falls in a species, and sometimes they won't be very huge. So maybe the emerger or the dun stage is more important. So you can always tell a mayfly nymph because it has 3 tails most of the time, almost always, and they have gills on their abdomen. And insects, remember, just are made up of 3 parts: a head region, a thorax region, and an abdomen. And you can see the gills right there on the abdomen of this nymph. The mayfly dun, the first adult stage, subadult sometimes we call it, it's characterized by kind of a overall dull color, first of all. They have 2 pair of upright wings. So in silhouette, they kind of look like little sailboats. The front wings are bigger than the hind wings. And again, they have no mouth parts. So they have to live, whatever they have in that little package is what they're going to rely on to live for the next couple of days. So their whole purpose as an adult is just to mate and then lay their eggs and die. So that's it in a nutshell. If you look close at this picture, I said, remember the duns are dull in color, and they're actually covered by very, very tiny little hairs. And if you look at the front wing there, you can see them. And that helps to kind of repel the water as they emerge and then get up and are able to fly away. When they molt into the spinner stage, however, because they lose those little hairs, they're a lot more shiny in color. So spinners are shiny, duns are dull. The wings become clear or kind of glass-like, hyaline in nature. Some things happen in the sexes. Mayflies, both duns and spinners, the males have very large eyes. So as you're learning insects and looking at them, sometimes someone will come up to me and say, well, I saw this mayfly with big red eyes. And it's like, well, it's a male. That's all I can tell you. The great big eyes are thought to help the males in the cloud and help them to spot the females and then grab them and mate with them. But they also, in the spinner stage, the males have their front legs get very long, they telescope out, and then they also have really, really long tails. So lots of body parts getting longer. This is what it looks like when the nymph gets transformed into the dun stage. You can see how those wings just kind of unfold out of there. This actually, as I was photographing the nymph, the dun emerged right in front of me, so that was pretty neat. Sometimes this takes, just a few seconds, sometimes a little bit longer, depends on the species. The dun to the spinner molt really happens away from the river, so you don't see it and we don't imitate it, but it's kind of fun to just watch it here in a series of still shots. It's kind of like, it just peels out of a sock or something, and that cuticle is left behind either on the plant, or sometimes if you have a home on a river or lake, you'll see all those little empty shucks left behind, meaning you had a big emergence overnight. So remember I said that mayfly nymphs had 3 tails, characterized by 3 tails and gills on their abdomen. And if you look at each of these 4 different pictures, you'll see that indeed there are 3 tails on each. And they also all have their gills on the abdomen. But they don't look anything alike, but indeed these are all different types of mayfly nymphs. And interestingly, you can learn a lot about these different body types and their behavior, where they live, and how they look as an adult as a result. So the clinger type mayfly is very flattened in appearance, and if you go to, they live under rocks and maybe under even logs in water that has pretty good current. It's very hard to just even take your fingernail and get them off. They're so really sucked down and very tightly adhered to their substrate. A crawler is they have more spindly legs and kind of a more robust body, but they're not very good swimmers. They typically live in a more gravelly substrate, and they crawl along and eat down in the gravelly stuff. The burrowing type mayflies, actually, if you look up at the head and their front legs, you can see like little spatulas that they use. Those are their little diggers, and they have tusks on their head. They're completely adapted for burrowing. They have very long filamentous gills that help them with respiration in typically a lower oxygenated type environment in that burrow. And they're really kind of almost hinged right there at the abdomen. So, and pale in color because they don't have to be camouflaged like some of the other mayflies that are out, in more obvious, on the substrates. And then the last group, the swimmers, they actually swim like a little minnow. And if you have ever been in a bug class, or you you know, picked bugs with kids, they're fun to look at because at first you think you've caught a little fish. They swim, you know, side to side like that. And the gills actually help them to swim and help them, you know, with almost like a little rudder. So each of these groups, you know, we could, you know, totally dive into that and learn a lot about the various habitats and what the adults from each of these look like. And I'm just going to pick one tonight. I'm going to go with the crawler mayfly. This happens to be a Hendrickson nymph. And what was I going to say about them? So, you know, a lot of times when nothing's happening, we fish a nymph, and in choosing a good pattern to put on, we have to think about what's happening in the life cycle. So nymphs can't just, it would be not in their best interest to just be swimming around in the water column all the time, because fish and other things would just eat them. So, and when I say the water column, I mean from the bottom substrate level up to the top of the water surface. So these nymphs have to pretty much be tucked away unless it's right before an emergence, or if they might also be on the move due to a phenomenon called drift. And some of you may have read about drift. Drift is a natural phenomenon whereby at a couple different key times of the day, insects will just kind of let go and move, you know, downstream, basically. Maybe because their food source is diminished. Maybe there's a predator that's threatening them, and they want to move out of town there. So this is typically at dawn and at dusk when this happens. Also, a time between midnight and 2 a.m. is also a little pulse of drift, but we're not usually fishing at that time. But if that's the event, in knowing those things, rather, if I were going to fish a Hendrickson nymph, I would want to fish it prior to an emergence and have the most success. Also, you can find them up in the water column right after a big disturbance, for example, like a big rain that would, you know, wash a whole lot of water and get things really stirred up, and you'll find them in the water column at that time. This is what a Hendrickson dun looks like. And in the crawler group of mayflies, the family is primarily the ephemerellids. This group is unique in, well, not unique, but it's very much male and female are different. So as if we didn't have enough obstacles in the way of learning insects as it was, we now have to learn males and females in this big family of mayflies. So those of you that like to fish early in the season know that the Hendrickson males are sort of pinkish in color in their body with dark wings. And of course you can tell this is a male because of those great big eyes. And then the female is a different color, but the profile looks very similar. Let me show you this in, so she's kind of a more brownish color, but here they are in black and white. There's the male, and I want you to look at the wings there and there, and you can see, yes, indeed, they are, you know, indeed the very same, just male and female. So this can seem like a, you know, tough to learn, but I like to compare it to those of you that enjoy, and probably most of you enjoy watching birds have a bird feeder, and it's like, well, yeah, I know a male and female cardinal, the profile is the same. They're just a little bit different color, and you'll get so that you learn to, you know, identify male and female in a hatch pretty readily. I had something else I was saying. In the spinner stage, so again, remember I said with the males especially, in addition to those really large eyes, the legs become very, very long, and look at how much longer the tails are. Typically when we tie flies, we make the tails be the same length as the body. That's true in the done stage, but in the spinner stage, there's just a really big difference. So there's the male, and then there's the female. Those of you that tie also, or if you're buying flies, oftentimes you'll find a little colored tag that represents the egg sac on your female patterns, and I think it's also a real stimulus to fish. I mean, they're seeing that color in the natural and adding that to your patterns. I think makes it a better pattern. When these are flying in the evening right before they're getting ready to lay their eggs, they just, to me, they look like little lanterns coming along. This is such a real neon colored egg sac. And depending on the different species, some have kind of this golden globish color, some are dark, some are green. So I try to put that in the book whenever possible, so that is helpful. So one thing that I got really excited about after I wrote the hatch guide, I wanted to sit around and look at bugs some more. So I kind of got my tanks going again and tried to actually videotape some of these emergences. So here's a Hendrickson nymph in the tank, and you can see now on sideways, it is kind of a robust little critter. You can see those gills just flapping away. This behavior right here is kind of a defensive posture. It probably didn't like me staring at it. Probably, annoyed with me, and I don't blame it. Here's a couple of them kind of interacting and tumbling. And in this final nymph stage, so there it is, it's trying to swim. It makes, several practice attempts, working up. I don't know what it, if it's just takes a while, if it's actually a little practice runs, but in this final stage of the nymph, as it's ready to develop, the mouth parts actually atrophy, and they don't eat in that last molt. They have all their eggs and sperm, the wing pads. The wings are fully developed, the eyes are huge, and it's pretty neat when you see these last stages of the nymph. Here's a nymph that swam to the surface, but couldn't get through. That air-water surface can be very challenging sometimes. I believe it was Kelly Gallup that termed the terms stillborn and cripples, and we'll talk about that. But this would be what he would call a stillborn or just a dud. And I watched this for an hour or 2 hours, and it just never was able to split and successfily emerge as that done stage. So you can imagine fish just picking this poor little critter off, and any other stillborns out of all the emergers. Fish like to eat where it's safe, and they're lazy, and this would be an easy eat. Once in a while, all things come together and a nymph will be successful. So it just splits, and that nymph shuck will fall into the river, or into the tank in this case, and then there is the dun ready to go and fly off. So it happens pretty quick. Here's this is a neat shot, so you can tell this is a male Hendrickson dun that has just emerged. I want you to watch in the bottom left corner there. There's another dun, or another nymph that has swam to the surface, and then boom, away it goes. So those of you that are beginners in this group, I can't stress enough the importance of being able to know your knots in the dark, and be able to change flies very quickly, because sometimes, in 15 minutes, you might have all your intense activity, and then a hatch might be over. I like to play this twice because I really enjoy watching it. So I also mentioned the word cripples. Here's a dun that was successful, a couple, but then to the left, you can see one coming through that, you know, obviously the wings have not fully emerged and it's basically just stuck. So everything else, you know, it got out of the shuck, but the wings never opened. It's like a parachute that didn't open. And so Kelly called these cripples, and sometimes, you know, there'll be a lot of these that hatch and fish will just sit and sip those because again, it's an easy eat and they might just collect back in a little foamy area of a stream. Oh, I better plug in. Hold on. All right. So let's think of the applications with that information. Reposition here. So knowing what you know about those life cycle stages, when you're on the river and you see, you know, fish moving up and down, maybe at the surface, maybe just below, you need to think about what stage is the fish actually eating. And you can look at the fish rise and determine that to a certain degree. So if you see a bulge where a fish comes up and holds there and it's eating something, they're coming like that more than once, several in a pot of fish, for example, you know that it's eating something underwater, either a nymph or an emerger, or, you know, maybe even like one of those stillborn ones. If you see the body come out, dorsal fin and tail, so like this, it's still, you don't see a head, you still know that it's eating something right underneath the surface, so probably an emerger. If you see the whole fish come out and break the surface, it's eating right at the surface. It could be an emerger, it could be a stillborn, a cripple, or a dun. And if you see, you know, fish sipping and not having to move a lot, then you know it's eating a spinner. So that should help you, you know, once you determine what hatch you're actually witnessing. And, you know, then you need to have all those different life cycle patterns in your fly box when you go to the river. So for example, with the Hendrickson hatch, you get to the river end of April into mid-May here in, I'm in Michigan, so in other, you know, Wisconsin, same thing. You got to have it in the right sizes. And when I first started fly fishing, I was confused by being sizes 12 to 14. It's like, well, which one is it? Well, in general, and with our insects, the females are bigger because they have a little bigger abdomen. It's full of eggs. So you need to have them in both the males and females. Something interesting that I learned, in general, when a hatch is just getting started on a river, the first to hatch are males, and that they might hatch for a day or two before the females come on. So sometimes a female, or the fish, excuse me, fish will key on those males for a little bit before they, you know, then might eat both male and female. Fish can be picky. It depends on a lot of things, but we've all been there and been frustrated. But oftentimes if I'm stuck on a hatch, I'll drop a size and maybe also even a tippet size and then find success. So the dun stage is going to of the Hendricksons will hatch in mid to late afternoon, with the spinners in early evening. And this is true, you know, anything that is supposed to be more of an evening spinner, which is most of our mayflies. If it's really hot, sometimes they'll come, you know, and have their reproduction in the morning when it's a little bit more pleasant. And you have to be in the right section of the river. So if you're gonna fish Hendricksons, you've got to go to streams that have nice gravelly habitat in the bottom of the river, not go to a section that, say, maybe is slow and silty, because you won't be able to find any Hendricksons that live there. So this is a sort of thing that, well, you know, I will plug my book a little bit, but as you study insects, you have to know this about every different hatch that you're targeting, and the more you know, the more success you're going to have. And don't be afraid to try a two-fly rig. So, for example, if you're seeing a fish rise that suggests it's right at the water surface, put a dun with a nymph dropper on there, or an emerger, or something to that effect, so that you can imitate both of those. And then if they're taking one over the other, you can always cut one off if one's really being more successful. All right, so let's look at another important order of insects, the stoneflies. Stoneflies have a more simple life cycle. It is another incomplete metamorphosis, so a gradual change from nymph to adult. Most of our stoneflies here in the upper Midwest have a 1-year lifespan. There are some that, some of the bigger ones can have a couple of years, especially as you go further north and it gets colder. But the female will lay her eggs, and they will grow and molt. And as they develop, you'll find them throughout the river. They like to have good oxygen. So you won't find them in the lower stretches of rivers. Often you won't find them in silty waters, for example. They have to have good oxygen flow. And as they get ready to emerge, they actually crawl to both sides of the river, and then the nymph will actually crawl out on a rock or maybe on some vegetation to emerge. And once that happens, it will crawl away. Oftentimes they will mate immediately upon emerging. And these adults do have mouth parts, and they will take in some moisture, and they may live for upwards of a week or 2 weeks, and they probably mate several times, and then the males, they're just going to die when they run out of energy. But the females, when they're ready and the eggs are ripened, they will return to the river and lay their eggs. So as far as us imitating the stages here, we really only imitate the female laying her eggs and this nymph down in the, living on the rocks. Again, if I'm going to fish a nymph, I'm going to be looking to see what adult is getting ready to emerge, and I don't want to be fishing it out to the middle of the river, but instead, since all the nymphs are moving to the edges of the river as they get ready to emerge, I'm going to go to the middle of the river and fish to the edge with the nymph. And then with the adult female, as she's laying her eggs, she's never really very still. I mean, those of you that enjoy watching them on the river, I mean, they're in and out of the water. They typically will, hit the water and then fly away, and do that several times. So you want to fish a stonefly with a little bit of action and twitching and up and down, and that will definitely get the attention of a hungry trout. Stonefly nymphs are pretty readily identifiable. Sometimes we say their body parts are in twos. They have 2 long antennae, 2 long tails. They have 2 sets of wing pads, and if you really want to look close, you can look, and they have 2 claws at the end of each of their legs. Those are the 2 wing pads right there. Some stoneflies have, if you turn them over, they have gills under their armpits. Actually, some a little bit on a couple segments of the abdomen for some species. Some have them up under their chin. Some don't have any gills at all there. So we can't say as a group much other about their gills, except that it's variable. This is what an adult stonefly looks like. Often they have longish antennae, some with tails, some without. but the name of this order is Plecoptera, the stoneflies, and it actually means folded wings. It's a fan fold. And when you see them on the river, they have pretty big wings, but they're not the most acrobatic of flyers. They always remind me of small little helicopters out on the river. When they're on a rock like this, I'm afraid they do look a little bit like a cockroach, but I think they're much more attractive. Here's a female that I photographed on a microscope slide, and she was actually laying her eggs right on the slide. And as she lays her eggs, you look closely at her abdomen, you can see little gobs of black yet under the yellow pieces of abdomen there. But as she lays all those eggs, it's like a toothpaste tube, and you're squirting all that toothpaste out, and then you shrivel up the tube, and she gets those eggs out. And the same with mayflies, really. The abdomen will just kind of shrivel up. Okay, so this is what it looks like as an adult stonefly. The nymph emerges into the adult. Most of the time, our stoneflies will emerge at night, and they will crawl out at night. You'll see these shucks on the rocks in the morning. You'll know that there was a big stonefly emergence. But the bodies are very pale, and the wings are pale, and the body's quite colorful as this is happening. This takes a long time. So they really have to do this at night, because it takes anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour for them to fully emerge. So it's a very vulnerable time, and I can imagine all kinds of critters at night running along, eating these emerging stoneflies, mice and insects and spiders and other critters. But there it is, fully emerged and ready to mate. The last large order of insects that I want to address this evening are the caddis flies, or trichoptera as they're called, tricho meaning hair. And if you capture a caddis fly and hold it in your hand, when you release it, you'll find a lot of little hairs on your hand, and their bodies are covered in tiny little hairs. In fact, you can't really drown a caddisfly as a result of having all these little hairs. I remember Dean Hansen once shaking a caddisfly up in a soda bottle and demonstrating just that. And it was such a good demonstration, and it left a real memory for me. But so let's start with a female laying her eggs. She will lay her eggs, and let me back up. They do have a complete metamorphosis. So this is the first insect that we've looked at that has a pupa stage. And by and large, it's a 1-year life cycle. And when you have a complete metamorphosis, you call the immature insect a larva instead of a nymph. So the female will lay her eggs, and they will hatch into a little grub with 6 little eggs. The larva doesn't have a tail or anything else. It's kind of nondescript. Caddis are unique in that many of the species of caddis will build a case, which they carry around with them. Some carry them. Some of them are fixed. They might just be a little bunch of stones on a rock. It's a little permanent home versus a trailer type home. Some caddis are free living and roam around on a substrate, just eating and more or less being naked to the world. And still other caddis spin nets, and some of them have like a little net cave, and they'll live in one part and then go over and check their lair and feed over there and go back to the other side of the cave, which is kind of neat. Some just have big, long scoopy nets, and they will just live in those nets and feed in there. So the nets are made out of little silk, and caddis have their saliva almost is like a cement. And so they will build these cases as they grow and molt And you try to tear some of these cases apart, and it's amazing how well put together they are, and they're very challenging to tear apart. So after about a year, the larva will be fully developed and it's ready to undergo a pupation. Oftentimes, if it's a cased caddis, they will seal the shelter up and go through a complete metamorphosis. It takes about 2.5 weeks. And then they have some mandibles that they will, gnaw that enclosure, and the emerging pupa will then swim or crawl in some spaces up to the water surface, and then right along the thorax that will split, and the adult will emerge and fly off. When you see these the emerging pupa, or it's also called a ferrate adult, think of it as just an adult that's been perfectly packaged, and shrink wrapped into the best possible little shape, and it's able to be completely swim and be sheltered, and then when it splits that last case, it's ready to take off and fly away. So here again, as anglers, we can imitate the female laying her eggs. This one I haven't shown laying at the surface, but we do actually have quite a few caddis that will dive down along a rock or along vegetation, along your waders sometimes, and lay their eggs underwater like that. We can fish cased caddis, or in the event of the naked larva, can imitate the caddis larva with those kind of patterns. And really, for the most part, I believe the emerging pupa is quite often the best life cycle stage for many of our caddis to imitate. So here's an example of a cased caddis. This is actually the pycnopsyche, or stick caddis. We have a lot of that here in the upper Midwest. If you look on the bottom right, you can see some legs sticking out of those sticks, and it just crawls along and lives. The pycnopsyche actually has a really interesting life cycle in that it goes into a dormant stage. So I'm going to digress a little bit, but I get to do that because I'm the presenter. But the adult females will lay their eggs in late summer to early fall, and those eggs, depending on the species, will then hatch and feed on a lot of the decaying leaves, and they will grow, and then along about March or so, all those decaying leaves have been eaten, and they will go into kind of a dormant stage. And if you found them, you might think they were dead, but they're along the side of the river, and they're still alive and everything, but they've stopped eating. And then after a period of weeks to months, they basically wake up and then pupate. So it's quite interesting. And then that is all timed with the next big pulse of food, the decaying leaves again. So just kind of a little fun thing to know. Here's an example of a free living caddis. So up to the left is the head, and 6 legs there, and then down to the right, they don't have tails, but they have what are called anal prolegs, and it allows them to have a little hold fast on a surface that they can kind of then inch along and make their way around. Some of them will have, this one has paired gills on each of the segments of the abdomen, and some don't have gills at all. Each of these is a caddis larva, a case caddis in 3 instances, and then the top right, that's actually a web spinner that I took out of its web just for the photograph. But you can see that They use an assortment of materials, and many times you can just look at the case and identify what it is based on the materials that are used in the case. Here's the ferret adult. So that this is when it comes out of the cocoon and it's ready. It's right up at the surface. This is the little perfect package. And as you look at this, you can see the eyes very readily, the long antenna, the white gill remnants there on the abdomen that are left over from the larval stage. And then if you look at the wings, they're just stuffed in there like little saran wrapped. And it's going to split along the cuticle, and then a perfect adult is going to pop out of there. The adult caddis holds its wings in a tent-shaped fashion over its body. It has 2 pair of wings. You can see all the little hairs on it. Oftentimes caddis have fairly long antenna, and this is important when you try to discern different species. They have no tails at all, and the wings are quite a bit longer over their bodies. And you can see, you know, if a caddis was, let's say, 8 or 9 millimeters, the wing might extend another, 4 millimeters beyond that. So it's always kind of been interesting to me, when we tie an elk hair caddis, we really need to extend that elk hair a little bit further to truly represent the insect in the way it looks. Here's an example of several different caddis species. Some are quite beautiful, like the one in the top left and bottom right. And the one in the top right is just kind of nondescript. We have lots of that kind of caddis. Some are very interesting. The bottom left, that particular caddis, those antennae are probably 4 times the length of the body. And I'm not even able to get them all in the actual slide there. So I kind of wanted to also weave in a little history of where all of this bug stuff, how I got started with it and where it's led me. Many of us enjoy fly fishing because we can do it alone. It's very portable, and it takes us to beautiful places. But I think most of us would agree it's more fun with a friend. And, my friend Dorothy Schramm, I met probably, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago now, and she's many things. But one thing is, I could go on a long time about Dorothy, but she's an extraordinary teacher and a great organizer. She has wonderful ideas, and she and I became very involved in teaching schools for women at a time when, going into a fly ship, you might not even be waited on. And she and I wanted to, remove that barrier, and we started teaching workshops around, and everybody that was in them said, now what do I do? Now I can do this, but what's next? And so there were several clubs around that had men and women, but women were a little bit intimidated. And so we decided to create a club that would cater to women called Fly Girls. And our purpose was to educate women and get them into the sport, and also provide fishing opportunities as well as stewardship opportunities once they were in the club. And we didn't discriminate. We wanted everyone, we wanted men and women to be welcome. And so that was 25 years ago, and I can't even fathom, Dorothy and I have tried to do the math. We've taught, 1,500, 2,000 women how to fish, techniques, fly tying, all about gear, building rods, making your own wading pants under your waders. But I think, to me, what's made me happiest about this group is the friendships that have formed. When Dorothy and I first were involved at the very beginning, oftentimes we had to run every event and be there for everyone. And a wonderful thing happened on the way to the river, and all these friends met each other and started making plans on their own and going fishing together with one another. And the rest is really history. And we've been able to do fishing for all kinds of different species, not just in Michigan, but in, in Canada and Belize, Argentina, and honestly, a lot of us, all of our vacation time is, well, sometimes we have a family vacation, but most of our vacations are all about fish, and we have a good time. So we don't take ourselves too seriously, thankfully, and that's probably why we've been as successful as we have been. Lots of toothy critters, lots of big smiles on these anglers. And in the end, it's, all of us are members of the FFI, and it's important to give back to the environment, to the sport, to keep it alive and make it important, and to have a voice in the industry, and make some friends along the way. So that's virtually Buggy, and a little bit on Fly Girls. And thank you all. And if you would like to ask some questions, I hope I will be able to answer them for you.
And we have one, Patty Lucan from Arkansas, who is the chair of Women Connect, received the book recently, and she says, I have the book and it is great. One page will show the bug and information about it. Opposite the bug is the flyer flies that imitate the bug. Very nicely done.
Thank you.
We also had a couple questions to say, is there a hard copy that's bigger than the pocket-sized book, which of course is convenient to take to Riverside, or a field guide?
So right now there is not, but in publishing the second edition, I'm hoping to make it a little bit bigger. And as we all get older, we have a harder time, and with that small print. So I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger in the second edition, but it won't be hardcover. But I don't think it will be hardcover.
So if everybody would stay on for a minute, I'm going to launch a poll, and it's about some future talks that we're looking at that Anne graciously provided me some information on. And then the last one will be the email. If you're interested in the next version of the book, it'll list the email. And if you're interested in it, so please send us your name. We'll be in touch with Anne. And Anne, that was a great program. I learned more than I ever knew I could learn about bugs. So I'm going to launch this poll, and we can look. There's some more chat questions. So everybody will give time to answer. Meg Gallagher says it's great to see you.
Hi, Meg.
You have many, many, many compliments. Ronald Young says it's a great program. Could you share with us some starter flies that are your go-to patterns, is one of the questions.
Well, now that's a little bit of a challenge, because you have patterns that are attractors. Any of the Wolf series, those are all attractor patterns. But I really approach the river. I don't like to use the word scientifically, but I am going to use it, because when I go, I know what I'm looking for. I know that if I'm going to go to my little local stream, that it's a very gravelly stream, and all that ephemerellid, for example, the Hendricksons, I know that they're going to be there, and everything in that family. So I know I'll find Hendricksons and sulfurs and little mahoganies, and I know all those insects that are hatching there. So I can't say there's one pattern then that, you know, I'm going to have several patterns. I'm going to really cover my bases in going to the river. And one thing that I have worked hard on is, and I didn't really talk about it tonight, is organizing your fly box. And you can't go to the river and have one pattern that's going to work all the time, all year round, any day of the week. It's just, it's not, it doesn't work that way. There are some patterns, you know, like this time of the year, especially as you can use, I love Dennis Potter's fathead beetle. It catches things stupid, you know. So yes, I have some favorite patterns like that, but if I'm going to go out during, say, an Isonychia hatch, I do have some favorite patterns by local tires. So Ed McCoy is one of them. I'm not sure if that would mean anything to you guys, unless you knew Ed from being in Michigan. So I hope that doesn't, it sounds a little bit evasive, but I guess I am saying I don't really have, I don't have a couple patterns that I could just say, yeah, take these. I always have a blue-winged olive pattern, either both emergers and duns, because blue-winged olives are, anywhere you go in the country, you're going to find a blue-winged olive. There are lots of species of them. They get as big as about a size 16, and then smaller, you know, down to 22 or 24, if you can see to tie that on. And they're multi-volting, multi-hatching, so they have many broods. There's several broods in a year, maybe upwards of 3. So it's a pattern you should always have. And, you know, there are lots of various patterns that you can get that are local favorites, but you should always have that, for example, in your fly box.
You had I'll pass the name on. Would you be interested in doing Zooms for local TU meetings? Maybe this winter. That's from Jill Clark. And so can we have them send their name to Women Connect at Fly Fishers and connect you, Ann?
Certainly, that would be, I would then just deal with them directly.
Sure, and I can help you if you need any Zoom help. So send an email to womenconnect@flyfishersinternational.org. We had a excuse me, a question on any secrets on how to handle white millers or Goddards. They drive me nuts.
They're a tough one. I was hatching them out once, and they hatch so fast, and they are one of those they hatch so quickly. It's a big challenge. The way that I like to fish them as an adult, then with a dropper emerger pattern. And when you see, I wasn't trying to video things at that time. I couldn't believe how fast they emerged. It was, you know, it just like boom, off they went. It was just like, I'm trying to think as a kid, you know, like maybe those icy things, when they got melted and you could squirt them out, that's about what it was like watching these things come out of their cases and then just zoom to the top. So I think the best that you can do is have a pattern with you know, a white miller, maybe and it's bright at dark, so they're really hard to see. And I would put a little maybe neon yellow or pink, so that it doesn't show to the fish, but you can see your pattern, and then have like about an 18-inch dropper with an emerger pattern on it.
We talked about this yesterday, and this is from Joe Voss, and I'm sorry if I missed mentioning your name when I asked your question earlier, if some of you asked a question. How can we pick up a paperback version? Amazon listed for $995. Throw us a bone, Ann. Go ahead and elaborate about, you talked about maybe self-publishing.
Yeah, so I don't want to, there's certain, I like to say, if you can't say something nice, don't say it. So, but it was a big surprise when my book went out of print. So I don't know if anybody has actually purchased a book at the price of $900 on Amazon. I can tell you it is not me that is selling those. Um, if I have just a couple left and I'm holding on to them stingily, I'm waiting. I have initiated the first steps of self-publishing it, and so that I'll have full control this time. So that's why I say I hope to get this done by the end of this year. And if you just, stay in touch with me, I hope to have that by the end of the year. But you can find a copy anywhere, buy it. Don't buy it for $900. It's good, but it's not that good. Yeah, maybe find a friend that might have an extra copy and is willing to share with you.
Cheryl Klein asks, how many flies or fly boxes do you carry once you've picked out your target? And what pattern would you always have with you besides bluing olive and size?
Well, so I always have parachute atoms in multiple sizes because if you are unsure of something, a parachute can imitate a lot of things. Generally, size is more important than color, and especially if you're fishing, evening hours when probably fish can't see color as much. So ideally, so early spring, I'll have a fly box, and I like to have everything laid out with emergers, duns, and spinners. I typically keep a box of nymphs, and that way I don't have to fill that early spring with all of the nymphs as well. I just kind of have a big nymph box and a little nymph box. Generally, nymphs get smaller as the summer goes on, and so after our big hex hatch here in the Midwest, things start to get very small. So really, well, I digress. So early spring, I would have really just one fly box. And I would have Hendricksons and sulfurs and little mahoganies and blue winged olives. And that would pretty much cover it for, the first month or so. And then as we start to move into midsummer, I would carry both that box and then maybe my early summer box with gray drakes, brown drakes, some isonychias. And I like to, I'm not even going to answer how many fly boxes I have or how many I own. But I try to transition that way. And then I'll also include the stoneflies and caddis that are also hatching at that same time. And so in the back of my book, there's a fly chart, and you can kind of just break that into probably a solid 3 different fly boxes. And then I'll have a box with some smallish streamers that I'll take as well. And, honestly, streamers can also, they can be somewhat generic, but depending on what river you go to, they can get pretty tricky also. Some of those little middle patterns, I would, encourage you to look for Kevin Feaster's book coming out soon. Actually, I don't know when, but it's all on bait fish. And he's an amazing photographer and, does a lot of snorkeling, and I don't know if he dives or not, but spends a lot of time guiding the river and then also underneath the river. And he will have, if you look at his different streamer patterns for all the little fish that he has in his Muskegon River, it's pretty fascinating. And sometimes you think, holy cow, I don't have enough pockets to carry all these. So yeah, I very much carry bugs according to season. And now as we're getting into mid-July, I'll just pretty much have a lot of terrestrials in my fly box. I used to, before I got really analytical about this, have pretty sore neck muscles and be, look like the Michelin tire man on the river because, at first you only have one fly box, and then maybe two, and then pretty soon you can ramp it up to 8 or 10 boxes in no time. And unless you're organized about it, you feel like, oh, I got to have them all there, because there might be that one fly. But if it takes you 10 minutes to find that one fly, the hatch might be over. So it pays to do your homework.
Mike Courtney asks, you mentioned trichos. Can you elaborate?
Okay, sure. Trichos starting to come on here in the Midwest. Another multi-brood mayfly. So again, at the end of summer, I'm going to be I'll always have some different sized trichos. They're going to be bigger early in the season and they get smaller as the season progresses. They may be 2 or 3 broods, depending on where you live. Certainly in the West, you can have some nice sized fish that will kind of, school up and feed on them. Some of our rivers here, you can sometimes catch some nice fish on trichos. Sometimes you'll just catch little ones depending on where you are, but I've had really nice success out west with rainbow trouts, especially eating trichos. I'm not sure if that answers your question. There, you're just pretty much going to be most of the time fishing the spinner stage of that. I don't know too many people that try to fish the dun. Or the nymph. It's certainly very, very tiny. Yeah, and I can talk more if you want, or you might have more questions.
Well, we have the poll results, and 100% want to hear the mayfly, and 100% want to hear the hatch busters. So if you're graciously willing to come back, we would love to set up some more webinars with you. 89% are looking for that version 2 of your book.
Okay, great.
We have a suggestion that said sometimes your books can be found at local fly shops.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I just don't think anybody has any left now. I mean, unless you found a really obscure fly shop that was closed during all of the pandemic and just now opened and had 1 or 2 copies left. But as soon as it's available, I will be making it available to fly shops. And everybody was very upset when it happened. And so I want to get it back out there. I want to get it in people's hands because.
Yeah, it looks like most of my requests are, want this book, I need to find this book. Looks like I might have shut the poll down a little early because people are writing in saying yes to all the answers. We want to see you again. We want your book. We want to stay in touch. Well, I did have a question from Susan Parsons. Do you know what a crackleback is?
I do know that. That is I think it's from the Missouri state, and that is a nice fly. And that is actually, a friend of mine got me into fishing cracklebacks. And it's got quite a bit of color to it. And if you look it up, online, you'll see a lot of variation in how to tie it. And if you email me, I'll show you my version or a friend's version that is, you can tie it in a number of colors. It might imitate a number of different little, it's prettier than a soft hackle, but that is a nice fly. So I guess I probably, now that I've started fishing those, I like to carry soft hackles, but I'll put cracklebacks in that category too.
And for those of you, if I didn't mention it, because this talk was so well done, there in probably a couple days, if you go to flyfishersinternational.org, this talk will be available. And so if you want to watch it again, I want to watch every single one of those videos again. How did you not hatch a mosquito? This is my question. I'm like, how did she not have a garage full of mosquitoes?
Well, I'm not sure. Actually, I think I did at one point. You can't, I got to tell you, so you can't write a book like this. You couldn't do it prior to the age of digital cameras because you just couldn't do it. I mean, you can't see what you've done and if it came out. And then the same was true when video came along, and you can, sit and stare at a tank for hours and hours and hours, and, then get up and leave and go to the bathroom and have everything have happened while you were gone. And it's like, oh, please don't do that to me. But yeah, so I think I probably do have a mosquito in there, but I have literally thousands of files, and going back and finding things is a bit of a chore. And to that end as well, in taking the pictures of the bugs, they're all alive when I'm taking their pictures, and sometimes I might work hours on one. And, with the live insects I had to use strobe photography or strobe lighting, and sometimes it would be a real hot glare, or they would just blow up with white, and getting the exposure right, and the aperture and everything was, sometimes I wanted to pull my hair out, but I finally figured it out, and got a little bit better at it as I went along. But for every picture in my field guide, Hatch guide, there's probably 300 duds in the bad category.
Tom, and if I mess up your last name, I'm sorry. Tom Rucci says, how much can your books be related to other areas? I fish the West. And with that question from EJ, he says, it's always great to hear your insight, Anne. Were you ever able to work with Dave Hughes out West collaboratively?
No, I haven't worked with Dave collaboratively. I have, there's a lot of people with a lot of great knowledge. And being in the Midwest, the times when I get west, I try to spend it all on the water. And but maybe someday, hopefully, there are a lot of people that I'd like to spend some time and pick brains and share information. But as far as yes, so what I love about bugs is they're all very related. So out west, you'll have some things that we don't really have here, and the same out east. But you have what I call cousins. So your sulfurs, so what we call sulfurs, you have pale morning duns and pale evening duns. I think we call ours pale evenings. I like to go by the Latin names, but they might have slightly different sizes, but behaviorally, they're very similar in how they hatch and when they spin, and so there is a lot of analogies, and we do have a lot of the same things, but then there'll be some unique things that we have or that you have that we don't have, and so yes, but not entirely, if that makes sense.
We had a suggestion, how to organize your fly box would be a super webinar and much needed. I'm gonna put that down as a suggestion.
Okay. All right, I will do that. I've been working on that one for a few years, and I started on it a few years back, but I haven't birthed it yet, so I will work on that. Thanks for that suggestion. Thanks for the kick in the rear on that.
Yeah, Marianne Dozer, when I was a guide in Sisters, Oregon, and runs many classes. She's a master casting instructor. Actually was my mentor. First thing she did was show me your fly boxes. And it was quite embarrassing.
Well, that's a little bit of a private question. I was always told that you should never, you know, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't ask. But since she was a guide, she
She
gets.
was, well, and she was teaching a class
Oh, then she
on
definitely gets.
entomology, actually.
Well, perfect.
And just putting together, did you know that this looks like this, looks like this? Yeah, it
Well,
wasn't.
she can definitely do that then.
All right. All right. We'll forgive her for that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for the questions that I see, other than many, many, many compliments on the presentation and a lot of requests to get you back. So I appreciate your time, and keep an eye on that recording, and we'll be in touch, Ann.
Okay, real good. Thank you, Sandy and Corey and everyone for watching this evening, and we'll see you soon.
Good night, everyone. Stay healthy.
All right.